بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. MashaAllah, that's a nice greeting, a nice response. Alhamdulillah. We're gathered here this evening, as you all know, to listen to a very stimulating presentation by Dr. Zaytuna Muhammad, Muslim African Americans and Islamic Education. But I'm not going to introduce her at this point. I'm going to introduce the young man who will recite the Quran, and that's Brother Yusuf Nasir, who is a graduate of the Sister Clara Muhammad Schools, an institution and a personality, Sister Clara Muhammad, that Dr. Zaytuna Muhammad has done much research about. I wasn't supposed to say that because Sister Aida is going to introduce her, but it just slipped out. So in any case, so without further ado, we'll invite Brother Yusuf up to start the program with the Quran, and then Sister Aida Rashid, who is in charge with Brother Harun Sellers, our audiovisual department, and she's also been instrumental in working on the African American lecture series that we've had this February, Black History Month, this being the concluding event in that series. But inshallah, we will continue to have programming around issues of relevance to the African American Muslim experience in the United States. Last Friday, we had a very stimulating discussion of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. We were honored to have Imam Fahim Shuaib as an interlocutor and co-presenter, and very blessed to have his contributions. We'll continue that series the last Friday of each month. So next month, March, we'll be engaging Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and then in April, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. And so we invite all of you out for those events also, and we'll have a couple other lectures before the conclusion of this semester. So this time, really and truthfully, without further ado, we bring before you Brother Yusuf Nasir. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. How's everyone tonight? Good, alhamdulillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. صدق الله العظيم. And now I present to you Aida. Excuse me. Translation of that. In the name of Allah, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. By the morning brightness and by the night when it covers with darkness, your Lord has not taken leave of you, nor has he detested you. And the hereafter is better for you than the first life. And your Lord is going to give you, and you will be satisfied. And your Lord is going to give to you, and you will be satisfied. Did he not find you an orphan and give you refuge? And he found you lost and guided you. and he found you poor and made you self-sufficient. So as for the orphan, do not oppress him, and as for the petitioner, do not repel him. But as for the favor of your Lord, report it. Surely Allah, the mighty and powerful, speaks the truth. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. I'll stand on my tippy toes a little bit. Thank you all for being here. It's a privilege and an honor to introduce Dr. Zakiya Muhammad. Before I read her formal bio, I just want to say that I want to thank Imam Zayd Shakir for allowing me this opportunity. It has been a labor of love to bring my teacher, my auntie, someone that I just love so much and who I feel has contributed so much to Islamic education in America. When I went to visit her last weekend, I felt like I was in Medina with a great scholar, teacher. I had my own little time with her, and I thank Allah for the opportunity to sit with elders and for us to learn from elders and those who have acquired knowledge and who are continuing to share that knowledge in their later years. Dr. Zakiya Muhammad is the founding director of the Institute of Muslim American Studies. She earned a doctorate in education from Teachers College at Columbia University, New York, and a certificate for Arabic language and Islamic civilization from American Islamic College in Chicago. She's accredited with writing the first dissertation on Islamic schools in America and was appointed Director of Education for Claire Muhammad Schools by Imam W.D. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad was a research associate to Dr. C. Eric Lincoln on Muslim schools and affiliated scholar at Howard University under the direction of Dr. Suleiman and Yang. Dr. Muhammad has presented at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Georgetown University, and published in Muslim Education Quarterly, Cambridge, UK Journal of Negro Education, Journal on Religion and Education, and Encyclopedia of African American Education, and she has lectured at numerous institutions across the country. And so without further ado, I want to bring up Dr. Zakiya Muhammad, and please welcome her with a warm round of applause.
So this is the clip? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Okay. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad, to whom the Qur'an was revealed, is the last messenger to humanity. And I thank you all for coming out this evening. Alhamdulillah. I pray you all are well. This nervousness is interesting. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. To the community of Zaytuna College, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zayd Shakir, faculty, students, supporters, and guests, thank you so very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here at this impressive effort of Zaytuna College, and I thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Special thanks to my dear, beloved Aida Rashid for her professionalism, her kindness, and her extraordinary piety in this deen. I thank you so very much and pray Allah and believe that you have a very, very bright future. And thank you for your kindness, Aida. Dear brothers and sisters and guests this evening, my topic is Muslim African Americans and Islamic education. And this lecture will address the historical development and pedagogical issues that transformed education in the African American experience. So may Allah bless us all. Again, Assalamu alaikum. This traces the origins of the development of Islamic education in America from the early 14th century to the present. It begins with kidnapped enslaved Africans who brought the Qur'an to America. Well, how did they do that if they were shackled and enslaved? They followed the tradition of how we are advised to learn Qur'an. They brought it in their hearts and in their minds. And one of our dear beloved sisters, Sylvia and Diouf, some say, servants of Allah, I believe the picture is showing this extraordinary research that she did, confirming that Muslim African ancestors, their experience in the early Americas, it's worth reading. How many of you, let me see a show of hands, how many of you have read the book? Not as many as should. Hopefully you will go out and you will read. It's an extraordinary read. You will be very, very amazed at what this woman did in her research to uncover the contributions and the presence of African Muslims in the early American environment. So representing approximately 400 years, we will cover, with some very broad strokes I might add, 3 distinct stages of development. The enslavement period to World War I, which ends around 1918, from 1930 to 1975, and from 1975 to the present. But I will begin with an overview of the Muslim African American perception of education. We want to be very clear on that first. Then I will highlight problems in the establishment of Islamic education in America, and that of course includes Muslim schools, and then offer some recommendations for improvement. And then afterwards, I understand we're going to have a Q&A with Imam Zaid, and I look forward to that. First of all, this lecture is underpinned with the knowledge that there is one God, Allah, indivisible with no partner, spouse, or children, one creator, one natural world, and one human family. In Qur'anic language, that reality is Tauhid. It means unity, oneness, that all things are interrelated and interdependent except the creator. And willingly or unwillingly, the entire creation and humanity are evolving upward and outward. This is the plan of God, and it is outside the realm of power, human power, to assist or resist. Okay, so let's begin. First, with definitions and context. Who are Muslim African Americans and what is Islamic education? Muslim African Americans are the people whose lineage can be traced to Muslim ancestors kidnapped from Africa and enslaved in the Americas. The term was used as early as 1975 by Imam W. Din Muhammad, leader of the largest and most influential community of Muslims in the United States of America. Black Muslims was not what these people called themselves. That name was coined by Dr. C. Eric Lincoln in his seminal study, The Black Muslims in America, published in 1961. That's another read that's really critical. I would consider it basic education. In an effort to evolve from color-conscious designation to human identity, while honoring one's ethnic heritage, Imam Muhammad put forth the term Muslim African Americans. It was embraced by a majority of indigenous Muslims who regard their identity as first as Muslim, their ethnic identity as African heritage, and their national identity as American. Recalling a treasured ancestor, Dr. Ali Mazrui, it represents a triple heritage. Now, before we define Islamic education, let's first define education. The Encyclopedia of American Education defines education in two ways. One, the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, and habits that permit an individual to function and make decisions perceived as self-enhancing. The second definition, knowledge acquired through formal instruction. These definitions, although in English, originate from Latin. Educare, to train or mold, and educere, to lead out or to bring out. They are consistent with the Greek and Roman origins of Western intellectual thought. From the perspective of al-Islam, however, these definitions are incomplete. They do not definitively acknowledge the source, process, or the goal of education. We need to know that in American universities anchored in Western intellectual thought, education is an applied science. It draws from the disciplines of anthropology, sociology, and psychology. Over the decades, however, scholars have uncovered significant flaws in the philosophical underpinnings of these disciplines, resulting in misinformation and misapplication of educational theory and human development. Also influenced by humanism, the separation from the spiritual and the rational makes it rift with dualism. Today, a majority of scholars and citizens believe the American educational system is in crises. Pew Research Center reported as early as this year that on the PISA Program for International Student Assessment for the years 2015, out of 71 countries, the United States ranked 38th in math and 24 in science. Others conclude the crisis condition is more importantly reflected in the lack of moral and ethical behavior of citizens and their impact on the declining state of American culture and society. By contrast, education in al-Islam is a science. It is an exact science, specific to the human being. It has a process, content, and recipient with specific outcomes. It has been defined as the perfected process of human development that evolves the consciousness of the human being into the excellence of one's human potential. This consciousness begins with a spiritual component, realizing that the human being first has a role and responsibility to the Creator who created them and to the physical creation that sustains them, of which they are the guardians and trustees. In Islamic terms, Khalifatul Ard. Islamic education is constructed on the excellence of human nature, clarified in the revelation of Qur'an, and exemplified in the life example of Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him. It is estimated that there are approximately between 8 and 10 million Muslims in America. However, if you read popular media reports, it is still being said that there are 3 million Muslims in the United States. So the numbers still need to be corrected, but most reports agree that there are definitely more than 3 million. Some estimates say 5 to 6 million, others say between 8 and 10 million Muslims in the United States. The point is raised because the issue of Islamic schools is critical. The issue of Islamic education is critical because of the growing population and the projected increase because Muslims have babies. For most Muslim African Americans, education has been the number one priority and cannot be separated from the historical realities of the African American experience. Historically, education was perceived as the path to freedom, justice, and equality, but in reality, it has been the bane of existence for centuries. From 1865 to approximately 1930, a series of monumental leaders emerged, stressing education and self-determination as the path to freedom for African Americans. A few of them are Nat Turner, David Walker, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Dr. Benjamin Mays. Each sought education as a duplication of what was offered in traditional American schools, with the exception of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. However, in the environment of America, the dilemma that African Americans experienced had to do with the issue between the soul and the intellect, the spiritual and the rational. This has been the point of tension in terms of acquiring a proper education. By 1930-31 in particular, however, that effort towards acquiring an education changed dramatically with the leadership of Clara and Elijah Muhammad. It literally turned the page on how education was perceived and the pedagogical approach to education for African Americans. It is important to note that Muslims educated in traditional Muslim countries and indigenous Muslims have divergent views on Western and Islamic education. Muslim African Americans generally are not enamored with Western education and have historical precedents to explain why, as we will discuss. The issues of enslavement, the issues of inappropriate education, the issues of not being included in textbooks, et cetera, the issues of not having historical contributions presented. These are very real issues in terms of why African Americans generally are not enamored with Western education. In Muslim schools specifically, the issues of education between indigenous and Muslims educated in traditional Muslim countries, they come from different perspectives. Muslim African Americans learned in the early Muslim community of 1930 to 1975, the community built by Clara and Elijah Muhammad, and the one that was transitioned by Imam W. Din Muhammad in 1975, they learned to take responsibility for their own circumstances as it became evident that they would not be educated by others and set free. They would have to educate themselves and walk to freedom. And so they did. They know that the Qur'an provides knowledge of the correct perception of God, the unique pattern the Creator has designed for human existence and development, knowledge of human nature and the excellence in which it is created, the role of the natural world in inspiring and instructing the intellect, the unity of creation, Tauhid, and that all creation is interrelated and interdependent, the equality of male and female, and the distinct message each prophet brought to humanity. Each prophet brought a distinct message, not only to the specific groups that they were sent to, but they also registered a very distinct contribution to humanity. And of course, Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him, provides the extraordinary uswa, living example of human conduct that is a blessing and mercy to all humanity. For Muslim African Americans, the Quran is the source and not a resource. At the first education conference for principals and teachers of Clara Muhammad schools in Sedalia, North Carolina in 1982, educators assembled and were told by Imam W. Din Muhammad that education is the #1 priority. But he also says something else. And if you will permit me, I think it's important to read specifically what he said. So give me a moment and let me do that, please. Quote, he He said we cannot introduce the philosophy of Western society into our school. He said if we do that, we won't be Muslim anymore. So the heavy responsibility of Muslim educators is to extract from the Qur'an and from the life of Prophet Muhammad, praise and peace be upon him, the proper idea, the proper ideology, the proper way to look at the external world of reality. The educators in this community, he said, you can do this. And do not look for any psychology book or social behavior book in the library. He said, lock yourself up, throw out all the books and use only a dictionary. Only use a book that will give you terminology or meaning of a word if you don't know it. But do not use any book that suggests a philosophy, a principle, a way of behaving, or psychology. No, just reject it all. Take your Qur'an and take what we have in this community and sit down and lock the door and say, there is a strong temptation to pick up a white man and lean on him. But don't do that. No disrespect. We're going to keep all of that literature out, and we will design the course we should take. Muslims have their own way of thinking, and if you're behaving wrongly, most likely it is because you are thinking wrongly. He further said, the West is problematic. It is psychotic. We have to see it like this. As long as you look up to this world, you will always be under it. But any time that you latch onto the Qur'an and see its superiority, then you stand above the world. And that's the only way you can help it. Do you want to help this world, he asked? I know most of you want to help America. I know I do. Do you think I want to hurt America? No, I do not, he said. This is my home. My ancestors lived in Africa, but this is my home, the United States of America. Finally, he said, but I am critical of America, and that is what made America great. It was people, pioneers, who had a higher vision. They had a bigger vision than the present state they were in. So they were able to lead their country, their people, and their nation into a greater life. Now, what I'm about to read also distinguishes the very unique perspective of Muslim African Americans toward education, and I know you'll listen very carefully. He said, but now we are too far from the destiny that we ourselves have to grow into to allow foreign elements to come and stand over us. If you do that, we will be influenced. This small community in its beginning is like fresh clay. We'll be too easily influenced. Wait until you have established yourselves and have recognition in Africa, Asia, Egypt, and all over the world. Recognition for having established your own personality as a people. When we have gained that, then we will be like any other community. But until then, we are a peculiar people under the eyes of the Lord. So what was the result of this instruction in 1982? It took a very long time, dedicated, consistent work. But I'm so pleased to report to you that there is a curriculum like no other. It is called the Ascension of the Soul Model of Education. And that Ascension of the Soul Model of Education was developed over the last 2 decades by dedicated Muslim scholars, activists, committed believers, parents, and inshallah, you'll be able to see the result of it very soon. In addition, there are models The W.D. Muhammad High School, named after Imam W.D. Muhammad, that was established in 1989 in Atlanta. The first graduating class, those that matriculated in 4 years after 1989, we had there as a judge in Atlanta, Judge Fatima El-Amin, a professor and author at Spelman College from Duke University. We have a medical doctor in that graduating class. There have been many graduates that have done outstanding work as a result of the establishment of the Clara Muhammad School and the W.D. Muhammad High School in Atlanta. Around other parts of the country, but these represent the flagship school in Atlanta, Georgia. The school has been in existence for 41 years. And of course, its predecessor, the University of Islam, existed from 1932 until 1975. And the University of Islam is still in existence, but under another leadership. So painstaking and lovingly developed by dedicated scholars, educators, teachers, as I mentioned, that curricula, I'm going to borrow the words of one of the esteemed scholars who is just so beloved, Dr. Saeed Muhammad Al-Attas. He spoke these words about his own work, but I believe that this applies to this Ascension of the Soul model curriculum, that the formulation of concepts and the way that they have been blessed by Allah to come together is perhaps the first formulation and conceptualization of its kind found in the context of Muslim intellectual and religious thinking of our times. There is no curriculum like the Ascension of the Soul curriculum. And I will be able to answer a few questions about it, but it requires the people who work so diligently, Dr. Abdul Hamid El-Amin, Dr. John Yassin, Sister Layla Hameen, so many other Muslim scholars are the ones that really did the great labor, and hopefully if it interests you, it would be more appropriate for them to give you the details about this extraordinary work. What is unique about the curricula? One, it is a curriculum that any child of any ethnicity can feel comfortable in the classroom with. It is a curriculum that any child from any part of the world should be able to have a comfort level. Now, this is important. It is important because the current state of Muslim education is that only certain children of certain ethnicities can feel comfortable in a classroom. And there are other children of other ethnicities that are not comfortable in those classrooms because the classrooms are too enmeshed in ethnicity as opposed to the universality of their human identity. Many people have the misperception that that's the problem with Clara Muhammad schools. That's why other ethnicities don't send their children to Clara Muhammad schools, but that is not the case. If you sent your child to a Clara Muhammad school and your child is Egyptian or Syrian or whatever, they would find a comfort level there. And this is what is important. When we reach the point that we really have a universal curricula, the test of it is that any child from any ethnicity should feel comfortable in that classroom. And that is not the case. I was a principal of a school. I was the only African American. We had 400 and some students. I was the only African American. There were no African American children in the school, but there were brown children. And every brown children in that school had problems with the other students because they would oppress them. They would intimidate them. They would make fun of them. They demeaned them because of their brown skin. And that's a travesty. And then, of course, I was discriminated against in the same school with a new Board of Education, but that's another discussion. So the point is, if we are indeed an ummah, if we really understand what al-Islam really is, And if we really know how to develop curricula appropriately, any child of any ethnicity should feel comfortable in that classroom. Otherwise, how is this different from discrimination 400 years ago? So, research confirms that during the almost 400 slave trade, approximately 40% of those kidnapped and shipped to America were African Muslims. The physical Qur'an, as we said, was torn from the ancestors, but look what happened. Centuries later, the genetic memory encoded in their physical and spiritual DNA passed to their progeny, and it lives today, reflected in the increased conversion of African Americans to al-Islam. And for that, you may want to read Alan Austin, African Muslims in Antebellum America, and several other books, scholarship that has been produced reflecting that. We know some of the names and some of the stories of those ancestors. We know they were literate, they wrote Arabic, and they made entries in diaries. Their pictures are in the Library of Congress, historical societies, and museums throughout the country. This is Yaro Marum, slave ship to Harvard. This is the first portrait that was done by Peel that interests the community into this Muslim ancestor. In 2016, the remains of this African Muslim was exhumed in Washington, D.C., and reburied with a proper janazah conducted by Muslim African Americans at the Nation's Mosque in Washington, D.C., and the Archaeological and Historical Society of Washington, D.C. Yaro Mahmoud. This is a picture of him in his, this has just been placed in the Natural Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian. This is him in his later life. We also have Omar ibn Said. His approximate date of birth and date is 1770 to 1864. Omar ibn Said. Ayub Suleiman Diallo, his portrait is in, I think it's Pennsylvania, Historical Society of somewhere in Pennsylvania. This is Muhammad, and this is some memoirs. It's interesting. The Life of Job is the name that they, you know, many of the African ancestors, their names were shortened by the slave masters. But these are some of the memoirs of him, the Song of Solomon, the high priest of Bunda in Africa. He said, who was a slave about 2 years in Maryland, and afterwards being brought to England, was set free and sent to his native land in the year 1734. We also have Muhammad Ali bin Said. Nicholas Said is the other name that he was known by. His date of birth and passing is 1836 approximately to 1882. And this is the autobiography. This is available. This one is from the Historical Society, the library at the University of Texas is where this was found. And pictures of the slave trade on the coast of Africa. And then Abdur Rahman Ibrahim. Okay. And here's another ancestor, Muhammad Bakukwa. He was from Benin. It's now known Benin. In those days, it was called Zugo. And there are 5 classical slave narratives in this book, and it includes Ibn Sori, who's one that I was not familiar with, in addition to 4 others. We understand the literacy of these Muslim ancestors enabled them to know enabled us to know that they existed. It has been reported that they wrote portions of the Quran and were leaders of major slave rebellions in the South, in Haiti, in Brazil, in Cuba, but also they could position themselves in advantageous situations because they were literate. Slave narratives confirm they were congenial natural leaders and their skills as craftsmen advantaged them, but they were still part of the slave system. The challenge, however, is that there was no institutional establishment for the early Muslims of al-Islam. There was no institutionalization of al-Islam as a religion during the slave days. But Sylviane Diop says, quote, Muslims worked inside as well as outside the slavery system, and they played a major role in the successful slave rebellions. They organized and led the most threatening slave uprisings in urban America. And if you look at the scholars' research from Cuba, from Haiti, from the Caribbean, Muslims were the main ones who led the slave rebellions in those areas. Although individuals of other persuasions obtained similar results, the Muslims were the only groups that consistently, on a global scale, Haiti, Brazil, Cuba, etc., that led the slave rebellions. They pursued these objectives with tenacity, and they achieved a high degree of success. Now let's go back and take a look again at what this sentiment that African Americans have about education. Some say even an animus for it. Well, education for the enslaved was legally a crime. In Virginia, in 1680, a law was enacted to prohibit gatherings of any enslaved person for any reason, and the purpose was to ensure that no clandestine schools existed or meetings to plan rebellions. Enslaved people were prohibited from learning to read or write, subject to the penalty of the loss of a hand, a foot, their eyesight, or death. In 1695, Maryland imposed a fine of 1,000 pounds of tobacco on any teacher who instructed slaves. If it was a slave teaching a slave, they were also punished with physical maiming or even death. A few slave masters allowed a selected few to be able to read to keep records of production. Others felt that teaching the Bible would not only save their souls, but would make them more docile and amenable to their slave condition. South Carolina enacted its law in 1740, making it a crime for anyone to teach or cause any slaves to be taught to write or read, or to employ them in any capacity as a scribe in any matter of writing whatsoever. However, after 3 centuries of physical enslavement, eventually the Emancipation Proclamation of 1865 brought some relief, but not total relief. There were consistent efforts to keep the former enslaved uneducated. Nevertheless, the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, a people newly free began a century-long effort to educate themselves, and they made considerable progress. Particularly during Reconstruction, which was the period of 1865 to 1877. Many of you may not know that during the period of Reconstruction, there were 7 African Americans elected to Congress. More congressmen in the period of Reconstruction than we have today. And this is representative of the extreme vigor and effort that these former slaves engaged in order to be educated. There's a book out that definitively outlines that. It's called Capital Men. And there's a picture on the front of it of the 7 African-American former enslaved who were congressmen to the United States Congress. The author of the book is Philip Dray, D-R-A-Y, Philip. Suddenly cast out of their own with the challenge of becoming self-supporting after physical enslavement, these African Americans were fearless. Although falsely reported, if you read some history, they will tell you that after enslavement and the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans were wandering around the country not knowing what to do with themselves. The truth of the matter is they were moving around the country trying to find their lost family members that were torn from them during enslavement. The fact is, 4 million former enslaved people were searching for family members separated during enslavement, and a real account of that process, that period of time, is written by W.E.B. Du Bois, 1903. It's called The Souls of Black Folk. That is another required reading, The Souls of Black Folk. Forced to convert to Christianity, many of the former enslaved, accepted it because their fitra was to believe in God. But the conundrum that they experienced, and this is the issue for most African Americans with regards to the educational process that was forced upon them, the conundrum between the spiritual and the rational persisted. Early African Americans always believed that the answer was education, and it was. But the education needed was one that brought clarity and reconciliation between the spiritual and the rational, one that answered the pressing questions about God and their pitiful condition. Remember now, the source of the conflict was scriptural, because the Bible said what? The Bible said they were cursed, that black people were cursed. Genesis 9:18-27. So this is the burden that was on the hearts and the souls and the spirit of a people, that you are less than, you are cursed because of. The articulations of Frederick Douglass best describes the dilemma. Frederick Douglass was born enslaved. He taught himself to read and write. He ran away from the plantation and became an abolitionist and one of the greatest spokesmen on the intimate details of the condition of slavery in America. This is what he said, quote, "I had, through some medium," he said, "I know not what, but I had through some medium got some idea of God, the creator of all mankind, the black and the white, and that he had made the blacks serve the whites as slaves. How he could do that and be good, I could not tell." He said, "I was not satisfied with this theory, which made God responsible for slavery, for it pained me greatly, and I have wept over it long and often." Frederick Douglass, letter to his old master in his book, My Bondage and My Freedom, written in 1855. William Edgar Burghardt Du Bois, in 1901, did a study. What you need to know about W.E.B. Du Bois, he was the first African-American graduate from Harvard University with honors. He did the sociological work on the condition of African Americans, traveling around, and then he was at Atlanta University and there's an extraordinary compilation of his work, of what he did, the soul of the black folk, the Negro Common School, just an extraordinary amount of work. And he was also one of the founders of the NAACP, although the NAACP didn't turn out to be what he really wanted it to be, but nevertheless, the concept, he was the founder of that concept. But in 1901, his study, the Negro Common School, reported that in 1865, immediately after emancipation, there were fewer than 100,000 black students in schools in the South. But the demand for literacy was so great that by 1900, more than 1.5 million former enslaved people were enrolled in independent schools. Most of them were black church-based schools, and if they were not black church-based schools, they were operated by the American Missionary Society, which was a Caucasian Christian group who provided education for the former slaves. As these institutions represented the only hope for advancement for the former enslaved, the underlying epistemology of the education they received was not questioned. And to a great degree, the recipients did not know how to rationally separate the teachings they were receiving from the Bible, because the Bible was perceived as the authority, but yet it brought disturbance to the soul of these former slaves, because it said in Genesis and in other places in the Bible that these people were less than, that they were cursed. Thus, teaching and preaching, even to self-deprecation, became the twin wheels of progress for African Americans. But the conundrum or mental anguish continued. The Bible was the basis of all instruction in schools, all instruction in early America. And interpretations of it reinforced white supremacy and black inferiority. Are you all right? It is important to know that the environment in 20th century America was legally segregated and racially oppressive. Black people could be lynched on demand, and the criminal justice system was culpable. With little exception, everything in America had a religious, Christian, and a racial white pedestal, even the Ku Klux Klan. Outside of their ethnic enclaves, colored people, the name they were called at the time, in addition to coon, jungle bunny, shine, boot, and nigger, did not think, function, or exist without the permission of white people. The educated among the colored people were educated in schools established by white Christian missionaries, with curricula written by white Christian missionaries. Their path for success was mapped out by white people. It was understood that the model for colored people's advancement was to emulate white people and work towards white people's acceptance of colored people. As a result, the aspiring middle class of colored people who wanted to move out of their ethnic enclaves were obsessed with white acceptance and essentially beseeched white people for a place in their white world, to sit next to them, to share their accomplishments, to be taught and validated by them. The Caucasians' interpretation of Christianity and the Bible exerted hegemony over the spiritual and rational thought of colored people. Again, with little exception, colored people were overwhelmed with the notion that God was white and white supremacy was the rule, the law, and the way. Virtually every colored home and church in America had a picture of a Caucasian with blonde hair and blue eyes as the image of God. Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896 gave legal sanction to separate schools for blacks and whites. They were supposed to be equal accommodations, but of course they were not. State-sponsored education for African Americans did not commence in Georgia in particular until 1924. Georgia is referenced here because more black people lived in Georgia than any other state in the country. The single classroom children attended was described as not fit for cattle. The former governor of Georgia, Allen D. Chandler, wrote in 1901, "I do not believe in higher education for the darky. He should be taught trades. When he is taught fine arts, he gets educated above his caste, and it makes him unhappy," unquote. Others asserted, quote, We need more Negro schools devoted to turning out well-equipped household servants, coachmen, gardeners, farm laborers, and the like, unquote. The conundrum was African Americans were being educated, but they did not receive proper education. They were still relegated as inferior from the President of the United States to the common man. They sought answers as to why they were enslaved in the first place and still wondered how it could have happened. The future for themselves and their children became pressing issues for them, and the unanswered question was, were they out of favor with God? Were they cursed by God? As a result, the central issue for African Americans became one of identity, and the education they were receiving was not addressing that issue. Dr. Carter G. Woodson was also a graduate of Harvard University. But Dr. Carter G. Woodson decided Black people have made contributions. African people have made contributions. He is called the father of African American history. It started with a week. It was called Black History Week by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and it is now Black History Month. His book, which is absolutely required reading, Miseducation of the Negro. What did Dr. Carter G. Woodson say? I think everything I have here is required reading here. He wrote his book in 1933, and he said, the chief difficulty with the education of the Negro, and that was another name Black people were called, colored people, coon, jungle bunny, nigger, then Negro, okay? So now you're Negroes. So the chief difficulty with the education of the Negro is that it has been largely imitation of Caucasians, resulting in the enslavement of his mind. So it is not an original education that speaks from your own soul, your own spirit. Black people thought that they could just imitate what the Caucasian did and that would guarantee them success, and it did not. Now, interestingly, this notion of imitating is not lost on the global Muslim world. Let's look at the bigger Muslim world for a moment. Since the end of World War I, and particularly after World War II, American education has influenced education throughout the Muslim world. Consequently, not only the practice, but the language of education was morphed from its original Qur'anic and Islamic roots to a philosophy and practice that is at its core bifurcated into a religious and secular system. This dual system of education and lack of knowledge of Qur'anic foundations have confused and devastated the Muslim world. Further complicated by tyrannical leaders, wars, oppression, and poverty, the intellectual development of the collective ummah towards a model community defined by Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, prayers and peace be upon him, remains obscure. Although individual Muslims have and continue to excel, the collective ummah has struggled to produce significant educational institutions consistent with Quranic foundations, with the exception of this commendable effort at Zaytuna. Rather, Muslim countries have chosen to replicate Western institutions or at minimum merge philosophies. This acknowledgement was the catalyst for scholars who convened the first World Conference on Muslim Education at King Abdulaziz University, Jeddah, Mecca, from March 31 to April 8, 1977. 7 other conferences followed. In 1977, it was in Mecca. In 1980, it was in Islamabad. 1981 in Dhaka. 1982 in Jakarta. 1987, Cairo. 1996, South Africa, of which I was present. 2009 in Malaysia, and 2012 in Malaysia. In the Muslim world, education has been known. Well, before I go there, let me just say I want to make a brief comment. I'll wait about these conferences and the result, because you would expect these were scholars, jurists, educators who came together because they acknowledged that the Muslim world and its educational efforts were not on the right path. Unfortunately, it was not the individual scholars, it was the Muslim governments that undermined the effort. Muslim governments. And it started with Saudi Arabia. And the proof is there, and I'll tell you if you're interested, how they withdrew. We now know at that first conference, there was a seminal paper presented by Dr. Saeed Mohammed Al-Attas on the aims and objectives of Islamic education. He's such a wonderful man. But previously, Muslim educators referred to Islamic education as tarbiyah. He said, no, it's the wrong word. Tarbiyah, from the root rub, to grow, to multiply, to excel, etc. He said it is the wrong word because it is not peculiar to the aql, the human intellect, or the human being. That tarbiyah, more appropriately, is husbandry, that it deals with the cultivation and the bringing out for plants, for fauna, for flora, etc., but it is not unique to the human being. And Islamic education is unique for the human being, for the nafs, for the aql, for every aspect of the human being. That particular wording from the Qur'an, he suggests in his seminal paper, that from the Semitic fields that represent the Muslim experience, the logic and the vocabulary of the Quran, that the word must come out of that because you have to include the soul, the intellect, etc., when you deal with the education of human beings. And tarbiyah, he suggests, is the inappropriate term, although we have used that term for quite a bit, but he suggests it is not the correct term. So at the First World Conference, Dr. Saeed Al-Attas made the correction in his seminal articulation on the philosophy of Islamic education, preliminary thoughts on the nature of knowledge and the definition and aims of education. And he said the correct term is taqdeed, not tarbiyah, and he explained why. I can't get into all of it today, but hopefully you'll take that. To the Muslim world unfamiliar with Qur'anic foundations of education, he regarded his work, again, the aims and objectives of Islamic education and its framework for an Islamic philosophy of education, as the first formulation and conceptualization of its kind, found in the context of Muslim intellectual and religious thinking of our times. So I recall after the first 3 conferences by Muslim scholars, they brought the publications of those conferences to Abiquiu, New Mexico, and we happened to have been there because at that time we had about 40 Clara Muhammad schools. And Dr. Ali Al-Ashraf, may Allah bless his soul, he, Dr. Saeed Nasser, and 3 or 4 other scholars came to Abiquiu, New Mexico with the publication, with the papers that were presented at these first 3 world conferences. They were published in these wonderful books. They sent the books and they sent the scholars, And we had a whole weekend of sessions in Albuquerque, New Mexico, discussing Islamic education. And they presented to us what had been previously presented in these first 3 conferences. Now, the interesting thing is that at the conclusion of the first 3 conferences, even though they had knowledge, et cetera, they were still theoretical. The Clar Muhammad School participants that were there had a practical application in terms of how schools were conducted and what we were experiencing with students, et cetera. So this convergence of their scholarly insight and our practical application was a very vigorous and interesting session at Albuquerque, New Mexico. I recall that in the early 80s. Now, just to sum up what happened is that the most progressive countries, there were many resolutions out of these conferences that they had. I have a whole list of them. If anyone is interested, I can share those with you, but I think time is moving and I don't want to be over my time. So the most progressive country has been Malaysia in terms of really following through on the recommendations and the establishment of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. In the U.S., we have IIIT, the Institute of Islamic Thought there. They were very progressive at one point. I'm not able to speak to what they're doing currently. However, perhaps someone else can fill that in. But the point I want to make, and would someone advise me of the time because I don't want to go over? Well, but I need to know how much time I have left so that I can not disrespect your schedule. Because I still have quite a bit, and Imam Zayd and I were supposed to have a conversation. And I do feel like I'm going a long time. Okay, the most progressive. So the one in the United States, Dr. Anwar Ibrahim and Dr. Ismail Faruqi, of course, established the one in the United States, and their efforts were indeed commendable. And as I said, we can go into that further in the question and answers if anyone has that. But this is the point I really want to make. While the scholars were convening in Mecca in 1977, Muslim African Americans were also addressing their relationship with education. Now, we've been advised that there are 3 sources of knowledge: revelation, the written word, the natural creation, the observable world, and the human soul or the intellect, the hidden world. And what was interesting is that as the scholars were convening and writing, on the other side of the world, these Muslim African Americans were finding their way with regards to how to formulate an educational model that will work for their unique circumstances, because they do. It is a unique circumstance. And so there was a mother in 1932. Her name was Clara Muhammad. And she looked at her children. No, Mr. Haley, not yet. And decided that there had to be a way to improve the quality of their sense of self. And so the curricula for the University of Islam, which is the predecessor of Clar Muhammad Schools, was really born out of the need for the human soul to find a place of comfort and self-esteem. And the curricula Clar Muhammad constructed for her children did just that. It addressed their concept of self-identity and gave them their honored place in the world. It had the dignity missing in the segregated Bible-based schools that blacks were inferior. In Al-Islam, education begins with knowing the Creator who created you. That is the first intelligence. And it gives the soul its proper qibla or direction towards its ultimate destiny. Islamic education reflects in one's behavior, in one's adab. It is civilized behavior that is morally based. So Dr. Woodson, Carter G. Woodson, in his Miseducation of the Negro, also says something extraordinary in 1933 that is so amazing today. He said, in addition to saying that the education black people were seeking was imitation, he said, quote, "Men of scholarship and consequently of prophetic insight must show us the right way and lead us into the light which shines brighter and brighter." So in 1931, the most consequential social religious movement in America emerges. It was more powerful than the Marcus Garvey movement. It was the early expression of al-Islam, and it's lasted for 40 years, and that was called the Nation of Islam under the direction of Elijah Muhammad. Founded by Farad Muhammad and built by Clara and Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam became the light that shone brighter and brighter. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad turned a page in the history of African Americans and education. First, it was the beginning of the most significant presence of Islam in America, not the only presence, but the most significant. And secondly, its goal was not to imitate Caucasian education. It was not to integrate or reform white people. It was to reform black people. So what did he do? I told you that Clara started the curricula, but the issue that people have with Elijah Muhammad, among others, is he called the white man the devil. Let's get it out of the way. He said the white man is the devil, and he taught hate. Well, he would say, and many others would agree, he did not teach hate of the white man, he just taught you to know him. And it is amazing how academics just don't want to mention Elijah Muhammad. The scholarly work is such a void there. It's like a memo went around and everybody got it and are following it. So no one wants to talk about Elijah Muhammad. And it bemuses me, while so many want to talk about our beloved Malcolm. It just bemuses me. Well, the co-biographer of Malcolm's story, Alex Haley, let's listen to what Alex Haley had to say. In an interview in the journal called Black Scholar in 1976, Alex Haley responded to the question of the leadership place of Malcolm X, what leadership place Malcolm would hold in the African American experience. This is what he said, quote, "If I had to pick the single person who has been the most important figure for blacks in the black thrust from post-World War II, I would unequivocally pick Elijah Muhammad, because it was he who, when you think about it, not criminals or dejected as promoted by the media, it was he who held together and nursed that small organization from the 1930s. When the nation began to emerge, it was like a lightning bolt in opening up the consciousness of black people. In opening up the consciousness of black people. Now, interestingly enough, at the time, it began to emerge with its highly publicized hate white image, which was very, very unpopular at the time, and certainly unpopular in the media, which in turn made it unpopular among millions of people. That thinking was not by any means embraced by most blacks. Most blacks shrank from it. They feared it. But at the same time, it started them thinking. It was the thing which began to open up our consciousness away from just this blank psychic wall of total fear of the structure in which they lived. and I'm saying these things clinically. In the context of Black America's development, I would select Elijah Muhammad for the reason that he held together that which did this thing when it began to become publicized. Underneath him, I would put Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King on equal basis. They were both, in my view, immensely powerful. They appealed, as I see it, to broadly different groups of people. And by this, I mean simply that Dr. King's area was much more the people who were in the church. Malcolm would reach the people called the grassroots. And I'm saying this from having worked lots with Malcolm and very little with Dr. King. Black Scholar, September 1976. So, there he is. There he is. The little man from Georgia. Well, when he called the white man the devil, some things happened. Some very significant things happened. It began for a people to have internal looks into themselves, and things began to change. There she is, Clara Muhammad. Well, I'll just finish up with these photos. This is one of the first universities of Islam when they acquired their building in Chicago. Arabic was taught as early as 1952. When Malcolm presented at the Harlem Theater in New York City, the Apollo Theater in Harlem, New York, he introduced Imam W.D. Muhammad, who came forth and recited Al-Fatiha and read more of the Qur'an, several ayahs of the Qur'an in the 50s. This is Imam Muhammad. Can you see my hand on the thing there? The first row, the second person in the back. He was a graduate from the first graduating class of the University of Islam. That's Imam W.D. Muhammad. The second row, the first seat, The second row, the first seat. Okay? Here's Malcolm teaching. Man, husband, father, man, protector, provider, etc. And this is Sister Clara Muhammad. Her daughter is to the left, Ethel Muhammad, and there's Malcolm on the other side. So I have to wrap up. I'm over my time. I felt it was going too long, and I'm so sorry. But I do want to close with this, because this is critical. In 1991, Imam W.D. Muhammad took a delegation of imams to Saudi Arabia. The occasion included an audience with the highest Islamic scholars of that country. Among them was the esteemed Sheikh bin Baz, who was the Grand Mufti of Saudi from his date of birth and demise, 1910 to 1999. He was then the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia. One of the imams in attendance asked the esteemed assemblage, what would be the madhab? What would be the madhab, the school of thought that should be taught in America? It was reported by all of the imams that attended and Imam Muhammad himself that Sheikh bin Baz, the Grand Mufti, replied in a most animated way, madhab, madhab, no madhab. You follow your own madhab. Imam W.D. Muhammad later reported he already knew that there was a unique madhab for Muslim African Americans and America generally, but the question had to be raised for the benefit of the imams in his delegation and the world that was listening. The first Muslim African-American graduate, went to the University of Islam, studied Arabic in the University of Islam, and the first Muslim African-American graduate from Al-Azhar University, Dr. Akbar Muhammad, the brother, the younger brother of Imam W.D. Muhammad, the son of Clara and Elijah. Imam W.D. Muhammad, he held up the American flag, and Muslims in America went, what do you call it? Yeah. They say, "What are you doing? We don't believe this. America is the great Satan." He said, "No, this is our home. We're going to build here, we're going to live here, we're going to contribute here, and we're going to really make America great again." He was at the National Prayer Service for President Bill Clinton. The only Muslim present, and he also presented at the Vatican, which at some point I hope you will go online and look at Imam W.D. Muhammad at the Vatican. He's the Martin Luther King did not speak at the Vatican. He was the first Muslim and the only African American ever to speak from the pulpit of the Vatican. And what he said was Qur'an 49:13. Thank you all very much for your patience. Assalamu alaikum. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
If anyone has a question in the audience, please just make your way to the front left of the main hall. There is a Q&A mic in the front left, and you can take your questions in turn.
Assalamu alaikum. The first thing, my name is Muhammad Alim Ali, and I would like to thank you for clarifying history and giving history the proper context of how Al-Islam developed in this country. And I had the opportunity to work at the University of Islam and Sister Clara Muhammad School, and I'm still involved in education. So I totally agree with you about what you said, because when I see education and what's being taught now, there's a vacuum. There's a human vacuum, there's a moral vacuum, and the educational system is being totally corrupted by a lot of strange things. And I mean, for everybody, but in particular for African American children are lost. So praise be to Allah, and I feel very good about what you said, because like I said, in the context of history and what you clarified, because there were many times, and I've had this conversation with my wife, that I felt disrespected by the Muslims in general, because they failed to recognize the profoundness of how Al-Islam developed in America. So praise be to Allah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Is this on? It's on? You can hear me? Okay. Thank you so very much for that. Yes, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I'm a public school teacher in San Francisco, and so I was really curious about your comments about the curriculum that's been developed, the Ascension of the Soul curriculum.
Ascension of the Soul.
Ascension of the Soul. So I have two questions. My first question is about that. If you can share a little bit more about the curriculum. Is it for K5, K8? What age or grade level? Also, is the aim to use this curriculum exclusively in private and public charter schools that are operated by our community, or is the intention to export this curriculum to public schools like my public school? I'm interested in looking at different curriculums that are alternative to what the Eurocentric curriculum that we have in the schools. So is the idea to export it to influence teaching and learning throughout schools across America? And then my second question is about your comments. You mentioned that Imam Muhammad said in, I think, 1982 that how it was important for us to reject Western philosophy and not let that influence us until we have developed our unique personality and identity as like African American Muslims. So in your judgment, do you think we're there yet? Especially considering we're in Zaytuna, which is a school that does teach Western philosophy and Islamic philosophy. Do you think we're there yet to be reading and studying and taking away the good from Western philosophy that's not in contradiction to Islamic philosophy?
Good questions. First, the Ascension of the Soul curriculum is an alignment between revelation, human identity, and the natural creation. And I will give you a contact person to speak with it about, because I really, as impressed as I am and the little contributions that I personally made, it's more appropriate that you speak to the people who have really done the work. So I'll give you their names, Dr. Abdul Hamid El Amin and others, and let you converse and ask your questions directly to them, okay? On the second issue, Zaytuna is an academic institution for higher learning, and the age and the maturity of the students are able to look at Western education and Islamic education in a more structured way that will have great benefit. This curricula is for others, not that advanced in terms of the K-12 system of schools, even though it will be available for larger audiences, but it is primarily for the growing minds and developing minds. And if you recall, even in the University of Islam, when the schools first started, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not averse to having teenagers go to public schools. He did not want the young minds going to public schools. He said, we have to get our students on the right path first. You have to strengthen the mind, teach the mind early, and give it its foundation, and then it's able to experience another environment and not be swayed. Does that help? Does that answer? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, sister. Thank you. Thank you for your talk tonight. Could you perhaps elaborate on the significance and the importance of, in education, matching the rational aspect to the spiritual aspect, especially in the American and Black experience?
Yes, of course. Well, when we look at the educational process, first, there's a process involved, and there is a content, and then there's a recipient of that process and that content. So let's look at it at the physical level of the human being. We have a soul, we have a heart, we have a consciousness, we have an intelligence. And the soul cannot, see, the human identity, this curricula and what we've learned in this community is, again, human identity and how we really function. And that has always been the confusion for most of us. We know we're human beings, but we have not had the clarity that the Quran gives us in terms of our human identity. And that's what we were able to grow into and to understand. And it is important to understand all of these aspects of the human identity and how they function, how they work, so that we can reach the fullness and the excellence. So, if the soul is burdened, it's because the mind is burdened. And if the mind is burdened, it's because the soul is burdened. And you cannot function appropriately if you believe that you are out of touch. Thank you, dear brothers. Thank you so very much. Alhamdulillah. So you cannot function appropriately. Okay, let me step back. We have a fitra. The fitra is that inherent nature that the Creator has put in every human being. It is that which makes the butterfly know what to do. It's that which makes the bee know what to do, okay? It has its instruction from the Creator. As human beings, we also have a fitra, of an inherent nature in us from the Creator of the heavens and the earth that makes us do what we do. I heard one of our scholars here, Imam Fahim Shawai, once call it our internal GPS, okay? It is that in you that when you come across something, you have not cognitively reasoned it out, but there's something in you that says, don't go there, or don't do that. Have you all ever experienced anything like that? Okay, that's our fitra, our human nature that speaks to us that internal GPS system that the Creator has given us that guides us through this world. Well, that is interrupted when we have the wrong information processing in our intellect. If you are a human being, but you're being told that you're a dog and you're being treated like a dog, your whole internal system is turned upside down. So how we are taught in truth, this is why truth is important in the universe, al-haq, because truth has power to keep things in balance and register. How many of you know people who are lying and you can feel from them when they're lying? You feel it, is that right? Because it's against the order of the universe. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has constructed things. These things are so amazing. And so if we get the wrong information about who we are in terms of our human identity, we're off balance, we can't function. We have to have al-haq, we have to have truth, we have to have the right information, and it has to be consistent with the pattern that the Creator has ordained. And so this pattern is what is being interrupted by Shaitan. Shaitan has his own pattern about how he wants human beings to go. God has a pattern about how we're supposed to function as well. And when we are on the pattern, that unique creative pattern that the Almighty has given us, we are in sync, we are in order. Everything works really smoothly and beautifully for us. But when we are out of order, everything is a muck, a flux, conflict for us. And we wonder why our lives are crazy, because we're out of order. And the whole thing about the pattern of Islamic education, it is an internal consciousness that tells us we're on the right path already. You know when you're out of order, don't you? Nobody has to tell you you are out of order. You tell yourself, I'm out of order. Let me go somewhere, meditate, clean myself up, do what I need to do. So it is that consciousness. It is the process of consciousness that helps us even guide our own selves. And then when we have revelation from the Creator, that guides us even to a higher level. Because before revelation, before the written word came, human beings were functioning. They were getting information from the natural creation that was influencing the intellect. But it was trial and error. So revelation comes to give us specific guidance so that there's no more trial and error. Did that answer? Okay.
I want to couple with, I'm Linda Hassan. I was also at the school that Muhammad Ali was at the time of doing the first resurrection is what we called it. And it was such a joy to be there and be able to teach those young minds and mold those young minds into giving them the proper education. After the first happened and we went into the second resurrection, as we called it, it really was enthusiastically drawn, having people drawn into the right religion when Imam Muhammad really brought the right religion to us. It was really the compilation of everything that needed to be done that Allah sent him to be able to tell us how to really pray, how to really do, this religion the right way. It was a blessing. I was also at the delegation with Imam Muhammad when he went to Rome and spoke at the Vatican. It was a blessing to also see that and be able to be in that delegation and see him standing there and being able to, do the prayer for the Pope at the time it was done. Absolute joy. And I'm really thankful for you bringing this to us this time, because all of the years that we have been having Black History Month, as they call it, Imam Muhammad has been left, and his father has been left out of the books as though it never happened. Right. And it's just been a real void in my heart to have that continue to be done. You bringing it today. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah. Will we be able to show that 5-minute video? Okay. Any more questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was real good. I learned a lot. I kept thinking just forward, like many people who you talked about, Carter G. Woodson and Elijah Muhammad, other people were, in a sense, they were visionaries for the best way of navigating through this country. And some of them had a change of heart about how the original ideas changed as this reality of this American racism happened. I wonder what you think is a way forward in terms of like educational approaches. And the second is, if Elijah Muhammad was here today, what would be his observations of this America under this Donald Trump?
What are the way forward? I think the way forward is doing what we're striving to do. The community is growing. We're in our 5th, maybe 6th generation of Muslims who are more knowledgeable, who have more extensive world travels, who have more knowledge of the Qur'an. And I think we need to just continue to strive and do the work, realizing that what the Qur'an says is real and that it is unfolding as we are living right now. With regards to the new administration of the presidency, what would the Honorable Elijah Muhammad think of the new America? I think the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would say, "I told you so." I think that's what he would say. I think he would say, "I told you so." You know, let me just say this. It took courage in 1931 to be a Muslim. It took a lot of courage. So when you think of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Clara Muhammad, if you don't think of anything else, I want you to think of courage. Faith in God and courage. For those sisters to wear those long skirts and cover their hair and not eat pork and be the way that they were in 1931 America. Remember, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, they sent the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and 300 Muslim men to jail because they would not fight in the World War. They did not respect their Muslim status as conscientious objectors. They went to jail. But then there are people who say that they were thugs and criminals because they went to jail. They were not thugs and criminals. The J. Edgar Hoover FBI and the COINTEL put them in jail. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his oldest son Emmanuel, and several years later, 2 decades, Imam Muhammad himself was imprisoned for refusing to fight in the Korean War. They should be granted a presidential pardon. Yes, sir.
Someone who grew up under the legacy in Chicago and here, of Imam Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad, and the people who came before them. I think that the big question for our generation, who's been the opportunity to build the next foundation for the next generation, is what are the areas we can build out expertise for this American Muslim community who knows the belly of the beast, just like every other great Muslim community in the ages, to offer a solution or value that's unique to this situation and unique to solve the problems, because we have resources. We spend a little too much on things that we wear, not about things we own, but we have resources and we have knowledge and even some wisdom and experience. What are some of the things the elders want us to focus on to build, like Mansa Musa and them did in Timbuktu, like they built in Dar al-Hikmah and in Spain, that should be a focus for the next generations of us as we assume leadership in this community?
That's an excellent question. I think if we talk about education, I still think it's education because it will affect the future generations. If we can build institutions of learning, that will affect the future generations. And that's what's missing in the Muslim world. If you look around the Muslim world today, where are the new institutions of learning that Muslims have built? There are none because of this confusion about education. So I think the establishment of institutions is what Imam Muhammad advised. Not only that, but also business and culture. We need business and culture. The 4 rivers, he called it. Education first, and that's certainly education of the Qur'an, education in the broadest sense, our cultural life, our business life, and then the governance of that. Those are the 4 rivers that have to be established and have to flow in any community, in any people, in any culture to be successful. So those are the words of Imam, not my words, but the establishment of institutions. Thank you all so very much for coming. Thank you.
I did have one question online, and then if you have a question or comment, question. Maybe we can take the question and then ask the question online, and then maybe you can answer both questions.
Okay, good.
Just real quickly, I didn't want to put too much emphasis because I think there's an answer to my question in what is happening now, but I think that certainly society has somewhat addressed the issues of racism, but do you think that one of the reasons we're not going forward as Muslims is that we have not really addressed sufficiently the issue of racism amongst Muslims?
Excellent question. That was in my later paper that I wanted to address, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to address it and as I answer. We'll take the one online, and then I'll answer it for you.
Thank you. Is there a possibility of getting a copy of the paper that you are reading from? I'd like to gather the citations from Imam W.D. Muhammad's words and speech and those of Al-Attas for my own research. And also, how do we share this information into the black communities within smaller, more predominantly white Christian school systems so that the black children can learn another side of their ancestry? And I think this is related, that is there a Muslim African American historical text that you would advise for children? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I'll answer this one and then the issue of racism. We have established the Institute of Muslim American Studies, and that is the task that we have outlined for ourselves, to disseminate information because we are not included in history, African American studies, or other studies in the major universities. And so we're developing curricula and texts, resources. We want to be a resource site. The Institute has been around since 2010, but it has moved very slowly. Inshallah, we're going to pick up the pace and include this information. And I believe I will put this paper on the site so that it will be available for anyone who wants to get it. Would that work for you all? Okay. So as soon as I get home, I'll work on it and get the paper on the site. It's the Institute of Muslim American Studies, IMAS. IMAS, Institute of Muslim American Studies.com. Give me a few days, give me a week, and inshallah, we'll get the paper on the site for you, and it will have all of the references. Now, with regards to racism, that is an issue that we have not addressed, but it is critical because it exists. Let me just say this. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he left Mecca and went to Medina, one of the things that he instituted in Medina was called the Mu'akala. And that was a treaty. It was an agreement, not a treaty. It was an agreement between the Ansar and the Muhajirun that they would work together and support each other. And when our brothers and sisters who came from other Muslim countries came to America, they did not respect the Muslim African American that had built al-Islam in this country. Only one community, I've been told, did that, and that was in Minnesota. When the Somali Muslims came to Minnesota, they saluted the African American Muslims, and as a result, they worked together, they had schools, and Congressman Keith Ellison came out of Minnesota because they supported each other and worked together. But the immigrant Muslims who were really the brain drain as they left those countries. They had resources, they had wealth, they moved into the higher social economic areas, and they sent their children to public schools. But it wasn't until the 1980s, when those public schools began to falter, that they began to build Islamic schools, because in 1989, there were only 49 Muslim schools, and 38 of those were Clara Muhammad schools. So it was only when the public schools began to become corrupted did the Muslims begin to build Islamic institutions called schools. They were building masajids. but they did not have the respect for the African American community in many instances. There was no agreement that we are the Ansar or we are the Muhajirun and we'll work together to support. And I'll tell you, quite frankly, until we work together and support each other, even though there are a lot of converts coming to Islam, we will not see the rush of converts until they look at us and see us working together as one ummah. And that is something in my recommendations that would be what needs to be done. Thank you all very much for your kindness. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you for those who came out and stayed a little longer than we went over a little bit. But we want to, thank you guys for the standing ovation to Dr. Zakiya Muhammad. And again, we appreciate your support. We'll try to provide those resources also on our site and on the Facebook page of this event. Inshallah, may you guys have a wonderful evening, and may we close out with a dua. Imam Fahim, would you mind coming up to close us out with a dua, please?
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. Why don't we just recite Al-Fatiha in unison? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Assalamu alaikum. Congratulations.